The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Tombstone in the summer of 1885. The frontier town buzzed with the usual mix of miners, gamblers and drifters, but today carried an undercurrent of something darker. In the shadowy back room of Murphy's saloon, a crowd of rough men had gathered for an event that would never appear in any newspaper, an illegal auction of human lives. Ayanna stood in the center of the room, her wrists bound with coarse rope, but her spine straight as an arrow. At 19, she possessed the fierce beauty of her Apache heritage, high cheekbones, obsidian eyes that burned with defiance, and long black hair that caught what little light filtered through the grimy windows. Despite 3 days of captivity since the brutal raid on her village, she refused to bow her head or show the fear that gnawed at her heart. "Look at this one, gentlemen," sneered Marcus Webb, the auction's organizer, a thin man with gold teeth and cruel eyes. Fresh from the Apache stronghold up north. Young, strong and... He paused, noting the dangerous glint in Ayanna's eyes, spirited. The assembled buyers, ranchers, mine owners and worse, examined her like livestock. Ayanna met each gaze with unwavering intensity, her silence more powerful than any scream. She understood enough English to know her fate hung in the balance, but her Apache pride burned brighter than her fear. "What's her temperament like?" called out a portly man in an expensive suit. "I need workers, not fighters." Webb's smile faltered slightly. "Well, she's got spirit. The Apache are known for their resilience." "Resilience?" laughed another man harshly. "You mean she's trouble? I heard what happened to the last man who tried to break an Apache woman. Found him with his throat cut." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The stories of Apache resistance were legendary and terrifying. These men wanted easy prey, not a warrior who might slit their throats in their sleep. "She's beautiful, I'll give you that," admitted a rancher, "but beauty ain't worth dying for. Apache women are more dangerous than rattlesnakes." As the minutes ticked by, the enthusiasm in the room cooled like coffee left in the desert wind. No bids came. Webb's confidence cracked as he realized his prize might be worthless. The other merchandise, a terrified Mexican family, had already been sold, but Ayanna remained untouched by the auction's poison. "Come now, gentlemen," Webb pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. "Surely someone sees the value here. She's young, healthy, and likely to burn down my ranch the first chance she gets," interrupted a grizzled cattle baron. "Keep your Apache wildcat, Webb. I'll find my workers elsewhere." One by one, the potential buyers began to drift away, leaving Webb with a problem. He couldn't simply release Ayanna. She'd seen too much, knew too many faces. His eyes took on a sinister gleam as he considered darker alternatives. Outside, the sound of spurs on wooden planks announced a new arrival. The saloon doors swung open, and a figure emerged from the blazing afternoon sun like a specter from the mountains. Jack Sullivan stood 6 feet tall, his weathered face bearing the lines of a man who'd spent 15 years in the high country. His clothes were simple but well-made, leather chaps, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen countless storms. Most striking were his eyes, pale blue like winter sky, holding depths that spoke of solitude and hard-won wisdom. Jack had ridden into Tombstone for supplies, but the unusual crowd at Murphy's had caught his attention. Through the window, he glimpsed the scene inside and felt his blood turn to ice. He'd heard rumors of such auctions but had never witnessed one. The sight of the young Apache woman standing defiant before her captors stirred something deep in his chest, a rage he hadn't felt since the war. He pushed through the doors, his presence immediately commanding attention. The remaining men turned to size up this newcomer, noting the Colt .45 on his hip and the way he carried himself, like a man who'd faced death and made peace with it. "What's the bidding at?" Jack's voice cut through the room like a blade. Webb, sensing opportunity, straightened. "Well, now, we were just discussing." "I asked what's the bidding at," Jack repeated, his eyes never leaving Ayanna's face. For a moment, their gazes met and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits trapped in an unjust world. "No bids yet," Webb admitted reluctantly. "She's particular merchandise." Jack stepped closer and Ayanna tensed, expecting another leering examination. Instead, he spoke directly to her in halting but respectful Apache. "I will not harm you." The words, though imperfect, carried sincerity that made Ayanna's eyes widen slightly. Few white men bothered to learn even basic Apache phrases, and fewer still spoke them with such evident respect. "I'll take her," Jack announced, reaching into his vest pocket. "How much?" Webb's greed flared. "Well, for a prime specimen like this, $500. It was an enormous sum, more than most men made in 2 years. Jack's jaw tightened, but he pulled out a worn leather pouch and began counting bills. Every dollar represented months of hard work, selling cattle and horses to survive in the unforgiving mountains. "You're making a mistake, stranger," warned one of the remaining men. "Apache women are nothing but trouble." Jack finished counting and placed the money on the table. "Maybe. But keeping people in chains is a bigger mistake." The room fell silent. Webb snatched up the money, but something in Jack's tone made him uneasy. This wasn't a purchase, it felt like a challenge. "Pleasure doing business," Webb muttered, but his hand drifted toward his gun. Jack cut Ayana's bonds with a sharp knife, his movements careful and non-threatening. As the ropes fell away, she rubbed her wrists, her dark eyes studying this strange cowboy who just spent a fortune on her freedom. "You're free to go," Jack said quietly in English, then repeated it in Apache. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Webb's face darkened as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. "Now wait just a minute." But Jack was already moving toward the door, Ayana beside him. As they stepped into the blazing sunlight, he could feel hostile eyes following them from the saloon's windows. "This ain't over, Sullivan," Webb's voice carried from behind them. "You just made yourself some powerful enemies." Jack helped Ayana onto his spare horse, noting how she moved with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. As they rode slowly down Tombstone's main street, he could feel the weight of watching eyes and knew their troubles were just beginning. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, colors that reminded Ayana of the sacred fires of her people. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope that she might see those fires again. But freedom, as both she and Jack were about to learn, would come at a price neither of them could yet imagine. The desert wind carried whispers of danger as Jack and Ayana rode north from Tombstone, the town's dusty buildings shrinking behind them like a bad dream. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the saguaro-dotted landscape, and Jack's experienced eyes constantly scanned the horizon for signs of pursuit. Ayana rode beside him in silence, her posture alert and dignified despite her ordeal. She studied this strange cowboy who had spent his life's savings to free her, trying to understand his motivations. In her experience, white men rarely acted without expecting something in return. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked in careful English, her voice carrying the musical cadence of her native tongue. Jack glanced at her, surprised by her fluency. "North, toward the mountains. There's an Apache settlement about 2 days' ride from here. I figure that's where you'd want to go. You know of my people's camps?" "I make it my business to know who my neighbors are," Jack replied simply. "Been trading with Chief Nache's band for years. Horses mostly, sometimes cattle. They're good people, honest in their dealings." This revelation shifted something in Ayana's perception. Most white settlers viewed the Apache as savage enemies to be feared or destroyed. This man spoke of them as neighbors, trading partners. "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since the saloon. Jack was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands steady on the reins. "My father fought in the war between the states," he finally said. "Came home broken, talking about the things he'd seen. Said the worst part wasn't the killing, it was watching good men do nothing while evil happened right in front of them. Swore he'd never be one of those men again." "And you?" "I reckon I inherited his conscience along with his stubbornness." Behind them, dust clouds began to appear on the horizon, riders moving fast and with purpose. Jack's jaw tightened as he counted at least 6 horses. "We've got company," he said grimly. "Webb's men most likely. They're not going to let this go." Ayana's eyes flashed with fierce determination. "Then we fight." "Not yet," Jack said, spurring his horse to a faster pace. "First we run. I know this country better than they do." They pushed their horses hard across the broken terrain, weaving between towering rock formations and ancient arroyos carved by flash floods. Jack led them through a maze of canyons and mesas, using every trick he'd learned in 15 years of mountain living. But their pursuers were persistent and well-mounted. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of crimson and gold, the gap between hunter and hunted continued to narrow. "There." Jack pointed to a narrow canyon ahead. "We can make a stand there if we have to." They rode into the canyon's mouth just as the first shots rang out behind them. Bullets whined off the rock walls, sending chips of stone flying. Jack's horse stumbled, blood streaming from a graze on its flank, but the animal kept moving. The canyon opened into a small circular area surrounded by high walls, a natural fortress, but also a potential trap. Jack dismounted quickly, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Can you shoot?" he asked Ayana. In response, she drew a knife from her boot, a blade she'd managed to conceal during her captivity. "I prefer to look my enemies in the eye." 6 riders thundered into the canyon, led by Webb and his lieutenant, a scarred man called Briggs. They spread out in a semicircle, confident they had their quarry trapped. "Sullivan," Webb called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You've caused me considerable trouble. That girl represents a significant investment." "She's not property," Jack replied, his rifle trained on Webb's chest. "She's a human being." "Human being?" Briggs laughed harshly. "She's a savage just like the rest of her kind. You're a fool if you think she won't turn on you first chance she gets." Ayana stepped forward, her knife glinting in the dying light. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of generations of warriors. "I am Ayana of the Chiricahua Apache, daughter of Chief Cochise's bloodline. My ancestors fought your people when they first came to steal our lands. We have never been anyone's property and we never will be." Her words rang with such power and dignity that even some of Webb's men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. "Enough talk," Webb snarled. "Briggs, take the men in." The attack came from an unexpected direction. Ayana moved like lightning, her knife flying through the air to bury itself in Briggs's shoulder. As he screamed and toppled from his horse, Jack's rifle barked and another man fell. The canyon erupted in gunfire and chaos. Jack and Ayana fought back to back, their movements coordinated despite having known each other for mere hours. She retrieved weapons from fallen enemies while he provided covering fire, their partnership born of necessity but tempered by growing mutual respect. When the smoke cleared, 3 of Webb's men lay dead or wounded. Webb himself had taken a bullet in the leg but remained mounted, his face twisted with rage and pain. "This isn't over, Sullivan," he gasped. "I've got friends in high places. The territorial governor himself owes me favors. You'll hang for this." "Maybe," Jack replied calmly, reloading his rifle. "But you won't be around to see it if you don't ride out of here right now." Webb and his remaining men retreated, but his parting words carried the weight of prophecy. Jack knew they'd made enemies who wouldn't forget or forgive. As night fell over the desert, Jack and Ayana made camp in the canyon, building a small fire against the gathering cold. The adrenaline of battle had faded, leaving them both exhausted but alive. "You fight well for a cowboy," Ayana said, tending to a graze on Jack's arm with surprising gentleness. "You fight well for anyone," he replied. "Your father taught you?" "My father, my brothers, my grandfather. Apache children learn to fight before they learn to walk. It is the only way to survive in a world that wants us dead." Jack studied her face in the firelight, seeing not the savage of frontier legend but a young woman carrying the weight of her people's struggle. "What happened to your family?" "In the raid." Ayana's expression darkened. "Dead. All dead. I was gathering medicinal plants when the soldiers came. By the time I returned." She didn't finish, but Jack could see the pain in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Sorry does not bring back the dead," she replied, but without bitterness. "But it is more than most of your people offer." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. Finally, Ayana spoke again. "Why do you live alone in the mountains? Do you have no family?" Jack poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Had a wife once. Sarah. She died of fever 3 years ago. No children. After that, the mountains seemed like the only place that made sense." "You understand loss?" Ayana said softly. "I understand that the world can be cruel to good people," Jack replied. "But I also understand that sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a chance to do something right." As they prepared to sleep, taking turns on watch, both knew that their journey was far from over. Webb's threats weren't idle. He had connections, resources, and a reputation to protect. The territorial authorities might well brand Jack an outlaw for interfering with legitimate business. But for now, under the vast canopy of desert stars, they had each other's backs and a shared understanding that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. Tonight, they were alive, free, and bound together by something stronger than circumstance. A mutual recognition of honor in a world that often seemed to have forgotten what the word meant. Dawn broke over the Chiricahua Mountains with the promise of another scorching day, but Jack and Ayana were already 3 hours into their ride, pushing hard through terrain that grew more rugged with each mile. The high country offered better defensive positions, but it also meant leaving behind the familiar desert for Jack's domain. a landscape he knew like the lines on his weathered hands. Ayana rode with the natural grace of her people, seeming to become one with her horse as they navigated narrow mountain trails and steep switchbacks. Despite her ordeal, she showed no signs of fatigue, her dark eyes constantly scanning their surroundings with the alertness of a born warrior. "How much farther to the Apache settlement?" Jack asked as they paused to water their horses at a mountain stream. "Half a day, maybe less," Ayana replied, kneeling to drink from the crystal-clear water. "But we are being followed again." Jack had sensed it too, the prickle between his shoulder blades that came from years of living alone in dangerous country. Different riders this time. Moving more carefully. "Soldiers," Ayana said with certainty. "I can smell their horses, their leather." Webb has made good on his threat. As if summoned by her words, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the canyon below. A cavalry patrol emerged into view, a dozen blue-uniformed soldiers led by a young lieutenant whose brass buttons gleamed in the morning sun. "Jack Sullivan," the officer called out, his voice carrying the authority of the United States Army. "By order of Territorial Governor Murphy, you are under arrest for theft of property and inciting Indian hostilities." Jack's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, but Ayana caught his wrist. "No," she said quietly. "There are too many, and killing soldiers will only make things worse for both our peoples." The lieutenant, a clean-shaven man barely out of West Point, rode closer with his hand on his saber. "I am Lieutenant Harrison of the 4th Cavalry. You will surrender the stolen property and submit to arrest immediately." "Stolen property?" Jack's voice carried dangerous undertones. "You mean the young woman I freed from illegal slavers?" "The territorial government recognizes certain commercial arrangements," Harrison replied stiffly. "Your interference with lawful business has been reported by respected citizens." Ayana stepped forward, her bearing regal despite her simple clothing. When she spoke, her English was flawless and her tone carried the authority of nobility. "Lieutenant Harrison, I am Ayana, granddaughter of Chief Cochise and daughter of the Chiricahua Apache Nation. I was taken against my will and sold like cattle by criminals. This man," she gestured to Jack, "acted with honor to restore my freedom. If your government considers human trafficking lawful business, then your laws are worth less than the paper they're written on." Harrison's confidence wavered slightly. The Apache name Cochise still carried weight in military circles. The great chief had been both feared and respected by army commanders throughout the territory. "Nevertheless," he said, though less certainly, "I have my orders. Mr. Sullivan must return with us to face charges." "And what of me?" Ayana asked. "Will you return me to the auction block?" The lieutenant's discomfort was obvious. "You will be processed according to territorial policy regarding displaced Indians." "Which means a reservation," Jack said grimly. "Locked away from your homeland, dependent on government rations, forbidden to practice your traditions." "It's for their own protection," Harrison protested, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. Suddenly the mountain itself seemed to come alive. Apache warriors materialized from behind rocks and trees, their movements so silent and swift that they seemed to appear from thin air. In seconds the cavalry patrol found themselves surrounded by 24 armed men, their faces painted for war. At their head rode a man in his 50s, his weathered features bearing the unmistakable stamp of leadership. Chief Nate, son of Cochise, sat his horse with the dignity of generations of Apache rulers. "Lieutenant," Nate said in perfect English, his voice carrying the weight of mountains, "you are trespassing on Apache land." Harrison's face went pale as he recognized the legendary war chief. "Chief Nate, we're in pursuit of a criminal." "I see only a man who showed honor to my people," Nate interrupted. "And I see soldiers who would arrest him for doing what your own laws claim to value, protecting the innocent." The tension in the mountain air was thick enough to cut. 12 soldiers faced 24 Apache warriors on terrain that favored the defenders. Harrison was young, but he wasn't stupid. He could read the tactical situation as clearly as anyone. "Jack Sullivan," Nate continued, "you are known to my people. You have traded fairly, spoken truthfully, and respected our ways. Today you have proven that honor exists among your kind." Jack inclined his head respectfully. "Chief Nate, I only did what any decent man should do." "And yet so few do," the chief replied. "Ayana, daughter of my blood, are you harmed?" "I am well, grandfather," Ayana replied, using the term of respect for an elder. "This man risked everything to free me from those who would make slaves of our people." Nate's eyes, black as obsidian, fixed on Lieutenant Harrison. "You have a choice, soldier. Ride away now and report that your quarry escaped into the mountains. Or try to take him and explain to your superiors how an entire cavalry patrol disappeared without a trace. Harrison's hand trembled slightly on his saber hilt. He was caught between military duty and the very real possibility of death for himself and his men. The Apache were legendary fighters and this was their territory. The territorial government will not accept, he began. The territorial government, Nate said with quiet menace, has broken every treaty it has ever made with my people. It has stolen our children, murdered our elders and driven us from lands our ancestors held sacred. Do not speak to me of what your government will accept. One of Harrison's sergeants, an older man with campaign ribbons on his chest, leaned close to whisper urgently in the lieutenant's ear. The sergeant had fought Apache before and knew the odds they faced. Jack stepped forward, his hands visible and empty. Lieutenant, I'll make this easy for you. I'm going to ride north with these people. You can report that I resisted arrest and escaped into hostile territory. Your superiors will understand. No one expects a dozen men to take on Nate's entire band. And if I refuse? Nate's warriors shifted almost imperceptibly, their weapons ready. The message was clear without being spoken. Harrison was silent for a long moment, weighing duty against survival. Finally, he straightened in his saddle. Sergeant Morrison, note in the log that the fugitive Jack Sullivan escaped into Apache territory after offering armed resistance. Pursuit was deemed inadvisable due to superior enemy numbers. Yes, sir, the sergeant replied with obvious relief. As the cavalry patrol turned to leave, Harrison called back one last time. Sullivan, this isn't over. There will be other patrols, other attempts to bring you in. Maybe, Jack replied. But today justice won. As the soldiers disappeared down the mountain trail, Nate turned to Jack with something that might have been a smile. You are welcome among my people, Jack Sullivan. But know that the path you have chosen will not be easy. The white man's government does not forgive those who challenge its authority. I figured as much, Jack said. But some things are worth the risk. Ayanna moved her horse closer to Jack's, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. You have given up everything, your home, your life among your people, for someone you barely know. Maybe, Jack replied, meeting her gaze. Or maybe I've found something worth more than what I gave up. As they rode deeper into the mountains with Nature's band, the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the rugged landscape. Behind them lay the world they had known. For Jack, a life of solitude and simple survival. For Ayanna, the ashes of her destroyed village and the memory of family lost. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the promise of a new kind of freedom. One that would have to be fought for every day, but one that belonged to them alone. The mountains had rendered their judgment, and for now, justice had prevailed. But both Jack and Ayanna knew that their greatest challenges still lay ahead, in a world that would not easily accept what they had chosen to become. 3 months had passed since that fateful day in the mountains, and the changing seasons had brought more than just cooler weather to the high country. In a hidden valley known only to the Apache, a small settlement had grown, a place where two worlds met and against all odds found common ground. Jack had proven himself to Nature's people through actions rather than words. His knowledge of cattle and horses had helped improve their herds, while his understanding of white man's tactics had aided in avoiding army patrols. More importantly, he had shown respect for Apache customs and had begun learning their language with the dedication of a man who intended to stay. Ayanna had become his teacher in more ways than one. As she guided him through the complexities of Apache culture, he had come to understand the depth of wisdom in her people's ways, their connection to the land, their concepts of honor and community, their sophisticated understanding of survival in harsh terrain. Your pronunciation is improving, Ayanna said with a rare smile as they sat by a small fire outside the lodge they now shared. Though you still sound like a bear trying to sing. Jack laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks. Well, bears are respected in these mountains, so I'll take that as a compliment. The easy banter between them had developed gradually, built on shared hardships and mutual respect. What had begun as gratitude had deepened into something neither had expected, a love that transcended the boundaries of race and culture. But their peace was about to be shattered. A young Apache scout rode hard into the valley, his horse lathered with sweat and his face grim with urgent news. He spoke rapidly to Chief Nate in their native tongue, and Jack watched the old chief's expression darken. What is it? Jack asked, though he already suspected the answer. Colonel Morrison is coming, Nate replied. 3 companies of cavalry, plus territorial marshals. They have Apache scouts with them, men who have been bought with promises of food for their families on the reservation. Ayanna's face went pale. How long do we have? 2 days, maybe less, the scout reported. They are moving fast and with purpose. Jack felt the familiar weight of decision settling on his shoulders. They're coming for me. If I leave, go back down to the desert, maybe they'll leave your people alone. No, Ayanna said firmly. We have been through this before. You are one of us now. We do not abandon our own. Nate nodded agreement. Besides, they will not stop with you. The government wants this valley, wants to drive us onto the reservation with the others. Your presence here is merely an excuse. That evening, as the settlement prepared for what might be their final battle, Jack found himself walking alone to a high ridge overlooking the valley. The stars were brilliant in the clear mountain air, and the silence was broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. Ayanna found him there as he had known she would. Having second thoughts? She asked, settling beside him on the rocky outcrop. About us? Never, Jack replied. About the path that brought us here? Sometimes. Regret is a luxury we cannot afford, Ayanna said softly. My grandfather taught me that. We can only move forward, carrying the lessons of the past but not its burdens. Jack took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. What do you think will happen tomorrow? We will fight, she said simply. And whatever comes after, we will face it together. Even if it means death? Especially then. Better to die free than live as slaves to men like Webb and Morrison. The next morning brought the sound of approaching horses and the glint of sunlight on military brass. Colonel Morrison had indeed come in force. Nearly 200 soldiers spread across the valley's entrance, cutting off any hope of escape. Morrison himself was a career soldier, gray-haired and hard-eyed, with the bearing of a man who had spent decades fighting Indians on the frontier. He rode forward under a white flag accompanied by a small escort. Chief Nate, he called out, his voice carrying across the valley. I am Colonel Morrison, commanding the 4th Cavalry. I have orders to arrest the fugitive Jack Sullivan and to relocate your people to the San Carlos Reservation. Nate rode out to meet him, flanked by his war chiefs and with Jack at his side. The two groups faced each other in the morning sunlight, representatives of civilizations that had been at war for generations. Colonel Morrison, Nate replied with dignity, you are not welcome here. This is Apache land recognized by treaty. Treaties can be renegotiated, Morrison said coldly. The territorial government has determined that this valley would be better suited for mining operations. Your people will be compensated and provided for at San Carlos. Compensated? Ayanna had ridden up beside Jack, her voice carrying the fury of her ancestors. You speak of compensation for stealing our homeland? For destroying our way of life. Morrison's eyes fixed on her with interest. You must be the Apache woman who started all this trouble. You'll be returned to the reservation where you belong. I belong where I choose to be, Ayanna replied. And I choose to be free. Jack urged his horse forward. Colonel, I'm the one you want. Let me make you a proposition. I'm listening. Single combat. You choose your best man, I'll fight him. If I win, you withdraw and leave these people in peace. If I lose, you get me and the Apache agree to relocate. Morrison laughed harshly. This isn't the Middle Ages, Sullivan. I don't settle military operations with duels. Then you're a coward hiding behind superior numbers, Jack said flatly. The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison's face flushed red, and his hand moved toward his saber. Careful, Sullivan. I could have you shot where you sit. You could try, Nate interjected. But my warriors have you surrounded. Look around, Colonel. Morrison's confidence wavered as he realized that Apache fighters had indeed positioned themselves on the ridges overlooking the valley. His superior numbers meant nothing if he was caught in a crossfire. What do you propose? Morrison asked through gritted teeth. Safe passage, Nate said. For all of us. We will leave this valley, but we will not go to your reservation. We will find new lands far from your mining interests. Impossible. I have orders. Your orders, Jack interrupted, are to arrest me and relocate the Apache. But they don't specify how or where. You could report that we escaped into Mexico. Your superiors would understand. Pursuing Apache across the border would be politically complicated. Morrison was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally he spoke. You have 1 hour to clear out. After that, I consider you all hostile and act accordingly. As the soldiers withdrew to a safe distance, the Apache settlement erupted into organized chaos. Families packed their most precious possessions, while warriors prepared for the possibility that Morrison might change his mind. Jack found himself helping an elderly Apache woman load her belongings onto a travois. She spoke no English, but her weathered hands gripped his arm with surprising strength, and her eyes conveyed gratitude that needed no translation. "She says you have a good heart," Ayana translated, appearing at his side. "She says the spirits guided you to us for a reason. What do you think?" Jack asked. "I think," Ayana said, shouldering her own pack, "that sometimes the spirits work through stubborn cowboys who don't know when to mind their own business." As the sun reached its zenith, the Apache band began their exodus from the valley. They moved with the fluid efficiency of a people who had been nomadic for centuries, their columns stretching across the mountain landscape like a river of humanity. Jack and Ayana rode side by side, no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance but partners who had chosen each other despite the odds. Behind them, Colonel Morrison watched from a distance, his face unreadable. "Where will we go?" Jack asked as they crested a ridge and looked back one last time at the valley that had briefly been home. "South," Nate replied, overhearing the question. "Into the Sierra Madre. There are places there where no army will follow, lands where we can live as our ancestors did." "And you?" Anna asked Jack. "Will you come with us into exile?" Jack looked at her, this remarkable woman who had shown him that courage came in many forms, that love could bridge any divide, that freedom was worth any sacrifice. Then he looked at the Apache people who had accepted him as one of their own, who had taught him that family was not just blood but choice. "I reckon," he said with a smile that reached his eyes, "that home isn't a place. It's the people you choose to stand with when the world gets difficult." As they rode south toward an uncertain future, the afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them lay the world they had known, a world of prejudice and hatred, of laws that protected the powerful and oppressed the weak. Ahead lay the unknown, dangerous, challenging but filled with possibility. They would face hardships certainly. There would be times when they questioned their choices, moments when the easy path would beckon. But they would face it all together. The cowboy who had learned that justice was worth more than comfort, the Apache woman who had shown him that love could conquer fear, and the people who had taught them both that freedom was not something granted by governments but something claimed by those brave enough to fight for it. In the end that was enough. More than enough. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in the sacred colors of the Apache, Jack Sullivan and Ayana rode toward their destiny, two souls who had found each other across the divide of cultures and had chosen to build something new from the ashes of the old. Their story would become legend among the Apache, passed down through generations as proof that love and courage could triumph over hatred and fear. And in the high country of the Sierra Madre, where eagles soared and ancient spirits watched over the land, they would build a life that honored both their peoples and proved that sometimes, the greatest revolutions begin with a single act of conscience. The mountains had rendered their final judgment, and it was this: that freedom, once truly claimed, could never be taken away.